Ich arbeite auch als Sozialarbeiter seit 1999 mit dieser Gruppe und meistens sind aus der ehemaligen Sowjetunion, aber auch nicht. Die wurden mehrfach, sagen wir so, geopfert oder traumatisiert oder ich weiß nicht, wie man das ausdrücken kann. Die Julia hat gesagt, Holocaust ja, Stalinismus ja, dann gute sowjetische Zeiten ja und dann kamen die nach Deutschland. Und so sind unsere Eltern und so sind wir und so sind teilweise unsere Kinder, weil mein Sohn ist auch 29 mittlerweile. Und wie er reagiert hat, wenn ich ihm erzählt habe über Baby Jahre, ja, so das ist diese mehrfache.
He didn't come to therapy because of his Holocaust background. He came because he was anxious at work, and also his mother made him a parental child throughout this terrible marriage and after the divorce. When Mr. Strauss read on the internet that I was an expert on the transmission of trauma, first he felt very guilty that he was bringing up very insignificant kinds of problems he was having at work, needing to be a perfectionist. Then he continues to say that he avoids identifying as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors because for him it connotes being a victim. It emerged that his father, every time he lost a job, will feel that he was a victim. I bring this case up because it represents a misconception of the psychological dynamics of being a descendant in Holocaust survivor families. Being a child of Holocaust survivor is not a personality syndrome. And by that I mean that when you have a control study where you compare children of Holocaust survivors to a different group that is very similar, what you find is that children of Holocaust survivors are not more clinically depressed, are not more psychotic, are not more borderline, are not more paranoid personalities. If they are they're not more depressed than others. They sometimes tend to be more concerned with more depressing subjects, but that does not make them clinically depressed. Of course, some children of survivors like this Mr. Strauss feel like victims, but there are others who feel a tremendous amount of resilience, and they also feel that they've gotten a particular kind of strength from their parents in terms of coping with difficult situations. And in fact, a study that was done about Israeli soldiers found that those who came from a Holocaust background felt they were able to cope much better with combat than those whose families did not come from there. So why does this particular group need mental health services, and particularly special ones? I wanted to ditto some of what Amit Shira said today. So today we're talking about children of Holocaust survivors. Some of them are already in their early 70s, they're in their 60s, and here and there you have some that are in their 50s. And they come in, particularly when we're talking about today. Why are they coming to therapy today? So some of them are coming to therapy because they're dealing with their parents dying. Some are dealing with their parents have already died, and those whose parents have died a long time ago, they're beginning to feel like if a parent is dying, can I ask them questions that I don't know? They're already so not feeling physically well, and am I going to harm them in some way by asking more questions? So we have the whole issue of communication. Those whose parents have died and they feel that they don't know very much. How do I find out what happened to my parents when they have already, deceased? Now, all of this in terms of the communication, how much you know, how much you don't know, very often has to do with what has been brought up in terms of identity issues. So the Holocaust survivors feel a positive sense about being a child of survivors, or is a Jewish person, or not. Some children of Holocaust survivors, believe it or not, have only recently found out that they were Jewish. They grew up in a home where their parents totally denied it, and then by accident some cousin said, oh, you know your mother was a Holocaust survivor. Or they happened to, as non-Jews, they went to Yad Vashem and they looked up the family name, and all of a sudden they find out, oh gee, they had this whole family history. Or they had parents who had lied to them, and again, somebody went to visit somebody, and all of a sudden, we're talking about the parent being dead quite a few years, they find out that their parents had lied about their particular history. So when you feel that you don't know your past, there is a sense of rootlessness. You don't feel that you don't know where you come from, and in some cases there is this feeling of a false self that develops, particularly for those who might have denied their particular family background. Moving on to values. What the children of Holocaust survivors learn. Some children of Holocaust survivors learned that they can't trust anybody outside their family. Now that, of course, creates terrible problems in terms of how do you develop an intimate relationship in order to be able to get married if you're not supposed to trust anybody outside of your own family. Some have a sense that, you can never go to a Jewish gathering because who knows who is going to attack you. In other situations, you learn how to fight whenever you heard something that is being said against other Jews. In other situations, you learn we Jews have suffered, we must help other people who are suffering. So that the values that one learned, the worldview that one learned, have a tremendous impact, again, on interpersonal relationships and how you feel about yourself, and also in particular, since in this particular case we're talking about Jews. Do you feel positive about being a Jew? Do you have to hide that you are Jewish, or do you have a lot of negative feelings about being Jewish? And then, as Stella mentioned earlier, we're talking about the whole, particularly, again, we're dealing with a lot of losses. So bringing up mourning is much more intensified for children of Holocaust survivors, because it brings up not only the losses in the past, but it also brings up not only the current losses, but it also brings up all the losses in one's family. Given the shortness of time, I just want to say that here we are dealing with a historical trauma. We're not dealing with somebody being raped, or somebody being held up at gunpoint. Every child of Holocaust survivors has to go through their own journey of understanding their own family and understanding how it affects them. But at the same time, we're talking about a collective experience, so that a collective experience ultimately cannot just be individual psychotherapy. There has to be collective, communal kinds of experiences, whether it's commemorations, whether it's educational opportunities that will enable one to be talking with others from a similar background, like this woman said how she felt good when people finally understood where she came from. Denying one's Holocaust family background, as I said, gives you a false kind of identity and also makes it very difficult to have intimate relationships. When children of Holocaust survivors get together, whether it's in a group, whether it's to socialize, to commemorate, to have common kinds of projects such as Holocaust education, genocide awareness, human rights concerns, immigration problems of new refugees, getting these together, these opportunities empower children of Holocaust survivors not only to get away from feeling like victims, but also to embrace what the final stage of mourning is, which is the search for meaning. Thank you.
Die Idee von diesem Therapieansatz ist, die Traumaerfahrung in die Gesamtbiografie einzubetten, also wirklich ein Gesamtnarrativ innerhalb dieser Therapie zu erschaffen. In diesem Gesamtnarrativ haben positive Lebensereignisse genauso Platz wie negative und am Ende eben einen Sinn in dem Ganzen zu finden, eine Bedeutung. Hinter diesem Therapieansatz stecken eigentlich zwei Hauptideen. Die eine Hauptidee ist, dass im Alter jeder ganz natürlicherweise das Bedürfnis hat, aufs Leben zurückzuschauen. Was ist, wenn das jetzt dieses Bedürfnis bei jemandem ist, der Traumata im Leben oder massive Traumata erlebt hat? Also versuchen wir mit der Therapie dieses Bedürfnis aufzugreifen und das konstruktiv zu nutzen. Die zweite Idee ist, dass nicht Erinnern per se irgendwie heilsam ist, sondern dass wir verschiedene Arten von Erinnern unterscheiden. Und wir unterscheiden gesunde Arten, gesunde Formen von Erinnern und solche Formen, die eben eher krank, die depressiv machen. Und wir versuchen in dieser Therapie eben die positiven Erinnerungsstile zu fördern. Das ist die Arbeit, die wir jetzt gerade mit den Überlebenden machen und es gibt viele Anknüpfungspunkte, finde ich, auch wenn ich den Kollegen hier zuhöre, die Experten in der Arbeit mit der zweiten und dritten Generation sind, die man da nutzen könnte. Also eine Idee wäre auf jeden Fall schon in die Therapie der Eltern eine systemische Komponente reinzunehmen, also die Angehörigen mit einzubeziehen und gemeinsam zu überlegen, was passiert mit den Narrativen, die innerhalb dieser Therapien entstehen. Es entstehen eine Art Lebensbücher. Was passiert mit denen? Wie werden die in der Familie kommuniziert? Sollen die weitergegeben werden an die Kinder, an die Enkelkinder? Wie wird damit umgegangen? Weil das ja, wie Eva Fogelman gerade gesagt hat, ein Hauptproblem ist, dass die Kommunikation oft nicht stattgefunden hat oder viel verschwiegen wurde. Die zweite Idee ist natürlich, dass auch Nachfolgegenerationen selbst, wenn eine Belastung da ist, eine psychische so eine Therapie nutzen können, gerade wenn sie selbst auch mittlerweile das Alter erreicht haben, selbst einen Lebensrückblick zu machen, selbst vielleicht eigene Ressourcen wiederzuentdecken, Verletzungen zu würdigen, um eben die eigene Identität zu stärken. Denn auch das Thema Identität in der zweiten Generation ist hier immer wieder gefallen und ich glaube, dass ein narrativer Ansatz helfen könnte, das zu stärken. Genau, das wäre jetzt mein kurzer Input erstmal in die Diskussion und ich freue mich auf weitere.
Since 1989 I've run second generation groups. They are short-term, 12 sessions only. And I've also facilitated groups in Berlin and have been involved in a project in Prague for first, second and third generation psychotherapists over the last 20 years. And I just wanted to say a little bit about the situation in England in terms of the population that we're talking about. So I will only deal with the Jewish refugees. There are about 70,000 who came over and only 2,000 survivors. This is just an estimate that's traditional estimates, and with the more recent political influxes, more survivors were added, like after 1956 and 68, and now anti-Semitism in France, so a lot of French have come over. So my estimate of how many second generation we're dealing with, Jewish second generation who don't necessarily identify as Jewish, but whose parents, so one parent or more, may have suffered from Nazi persecution. So the second generation we might be talking about 50,000. And in terms of the provision for therapy for second generation, there are 4 types really. So there's the formal provision, like provided by the National Health Service, which is notorious for its long waiting list. It's free of charge and it's time limited, and so you can assume that the therapist allocated won't necessarily be skilled in this area. Then there's Jewish care, so that's free of charge, but it sees second generation who have mental health problems, and then there's a specialist center for first generation Holocaust survivors and refugees, but they've committed to not helping second generation. And as the first generation is now dying, this may be revised, but though they said people could ask for the full minutes, they haven't of the meeting, they've said now that I can't see the minutes. So it's still not decided really whether they're going to offer something that the first generation won't necessarily agree with, because after all, the second generation is supposed to have had an easy life. So, talking about problems, the first generation doesn't necessarily acknowledge that the second generation has problems. So there's also no register of therapists skilled in working with second generation. So I mentioned the first 2, and I should have actually mentioned also under the formal organizations, the Association of Jewish Refugees, that does offer help to first generation, and is also for needy second generation. But at the moment, it's more. Michael Newman can say more about it later. But so it's particularly for first generation, but it has a very well-developed social work department, but social workers are not therapists. So first generation hasn't believed in therapy. I'll just skip that. And I would just like to say something quickly about the way I see the field, the need for therapy, because I quoted in my June presentation a meta-study of epidemiological studies that concluded that trauma resulted in diminished psychological functioning only when the second generation was confronted with situations of extreme stress. And somehow in the translation now, and there's a book that's called Lost in Translation, the findings that were presented here of what I said was just the opposite of what I meant to say. So the findings in this meta-study conflicted with my own observations among members of the second generation groups that I saw since 1989. And so in the meta-study, it said that the second generation only showed symptoms that were statistically significant in extreme situations. And that was in terms of illness or studies on Israeli soldiers, how they coped in the combat situation. And my own observations are that the second generation shows more subtle differences, and that those are very similar to other second generation populations that also show these subtle differences that once they understand them, they can learn to change them and actually become much more useful members of society, though they've spent all their lives to bend over backwards trying to please first their parents, and when they sort of became adults, they then did it with their partners, at work, and I'm referring to what I call people-pleasing, accommodating always other people's wishes before their own. And this means that they struggle dealing with conflict because they've always avoided conflict. So how much is my time over? Over. I just want to say in terms of, and this is really quick, in terms of taking it further, group membership and developing a meaningful social identity. So second generation always felt different from their peers and isolated, and like strangers in their own land. And relationships were a problem, and many have remained childless. And so provisions for survivors, and I'm thinking of the Holocaust Survivor Centre in London, Café Europa, outreach groups and homes for elderly survivors, have been most important for the mental health of Holocaust survivors. The needs of aging second generation have largely not been addressed, and yet new research has shown that loss of social role and loss of social identity, for instance upon retirement, leads to an earlier death. Social support through meaningful membership of a group is perceived as of crucial importance for self-esteem and resilience. Social identification is said to predict absence of depression and depression relapse. In Holland, where I come from originally, Villa Masselstein, a social housing project aimed at lonely second generation near existing Jewish facilities, seems to fulfill this need of loneliness as the second generation gets older and has to struggle without their parents and never got into long-lasting relationships. This kind of project should be implemented in other countries too. Thank you.
Those who are childless, those who are more isolated, obviously are the ones who gravitate towards participating in a group. But I'm wondering if you look at the whole population of children of survivors, what percentage would you say is childless?
Well, research is just non-existent because of lack of resources. So it is I don't know whether you, David, want to say anything about it, but it's a well-known phenomenon. In my groups, there are usually many more who are single than those who are in a relationship. And well, there are many second generation who grew up in non-Jewish areas because because their parents were so afraid to mix with Jews. They just wanted to get away from it. Because mixing with Jews might have been okay, but being identified then as Jewish, that was the problem. Of course, given the background. Well, I think, I'm sitting here with two experts, so Eva and Yael will probably confirm that it is known that second generation have problems with their relationships. And in contrast to their parents, I think they are more likely to divorce than their parents, because their parents were so frightened to be all on their own again. So, yeah, it's just the problem in England is that so many second generation didn't belong to anything positively Jewish. I think that if those who did grow up in a Jewish community did have the feeling that they weren't on their own, though at that time experiences about what it was like to be second generation weren't shared, and I would say that they're still not shared apart from in groups. So my second generation groups is the only facilitated group in the country, but there's another one that deals with caring for Holocaust survivors. That is also, second generation are members of that, but it's more focused on the caring rather than on being second generation.
I also wanted to support very much what Inga Kroll had said about the group there. We found the same thing. It is a place in a second generation group where you can talk freely and know that you are understood, and that's very important. I would also like to say resources, financial resources are important. Our second generation group is totally self-funded. It gets no support from any government sources or anybody else really. I know, for instance, that in Holland, for a while anyhow, second generation groups did get financial support from the government, but I think that's no longer happening. So we struggle on our own, and in a way it's a healthy struggle. Because we can talk to each other and we can encourage each other. And also I'd like to support what Jan was saying about group work. Group is important in supporting each other. In our second generation network, we don't have a therapist to run our group. We do it ourselves as best we can.
Sometimes better.
But I also like to also support what Eva was saying about second generation and a sense of rootlessness. In a sense, all of us come from somewhere else. I was trained as an anthropologist, and I was once told that actually we all come from Africa. Whether we do or not, I don't really know, but anyhow. But what this support group does is that we're supporting each other on our own journeys to discover who we are and where we come from. We all have our individual histories and our individual family histories. They're different, but we're supporting each other because, in a sense, we share something that we can't quite explain, but it is there. And also like to support what Eva was talking about in terms of search for meaning. Meaning, hopefully, in the therapeutic sense, meaning brings with it healing. That is what we're searching for. So I wanted to talk about, really very briefly, about journeys in the physical sense. What we have done in our second generation group is encourage others to go where our parents and grandparents came from. This is a journey of discovery about your family history, but also about yourself. I have looked at, we have our own magazine newsletter called Second Generation Voices. That was started in 1996 and carries on very successfully. And in this we have accounts of second generation journeys. And I've tried to distill some important aspects of this. I won't be too long. So, one is the importance and impact of just being there and treading on the same ground as close relatives or murdered ancestors. Two, being there with a person who had been there at the time when it all happened, whether it was a parent, a relative, or a guide, or a survivor who you happen to know and meet and comes along with you. Thirdly, getting there and the encounters made along the way, good and bad experiences, surprising and unexpected. you meet all sorts of people. And one of the good, excellent things about being in a place like this is you meet interesting people. We share something together. And often something unexpected comes up. And fourthly, in so doing, you've got acts to commemorate and memorialize on the spot, lighting a candle, saying Kaddish, whatever. All this is a tremendously important emotional experience. And as I said, some of these experiences are sad, tragic, sad memories, but also sometimes joyful in that you get connected with the past and you sometimes get to meet people who knew your parents or grandparents and can tell you something about them that you didn't know. So I've got far more to say, but I'll stop here for a moment.
Two things, again, and I'm thinking very purposefully in terms of funders, decision makers, and how to teach them, not just each other. Much of what we have learned is that we need specialized training to do this work. And that too involves resources. Not every therapist is able to listen even to the stories of survivors and their children. I've written extensively about that under the rubric of conspiracy of silence, which my colleague from Holland was referring to as the third traumatic sequence in Kyleson's work. And I found out 49 ways of not listening. And my therapist, trained psychoanalyst. So it's absolutely necessary, not just to advertise group as a vehicle, but also to emphasize that anyone who is, as a therapist, venturing to serve people who have suffered as much must be especially trained. It's an obligation and a responsibility. I also want us to not assume that group is the panacea everywhere. In our own groups, in our own study, we found that group work in Israel helped NUM-style folks, while groups in America did not. So it's also culturally determined. And everything is much more sophisticated. So we have not only to be open to the element of surprise, but to learn that the different dimensions to everything we say, and to always look at all of them. This is a very important intellectual discipline to create. I also want to say the third and last thing, that all, as you said, you call it rootlessness, you said about all of us coming from other places. All of survivors, including those who went to Israel, were refugees. And I'm thinking again, in terms of funding, the issues of refugees today, you have 1 million new refugees in Germany. Europe has many more. We can teach a great deal as to how to support and what to measure and how to help refugees. Maybe that's another way of connecting it to the current needs of the world.
I didn't want people to walk away thinking that children of Holocaust survivors are not getting married, are not having children, and are more suicidal. Having worked with this population for about 42 years, I know I don't look that old, you cannot, when you do research, you cannot just look at those who are coming to groups. Those who are coming to groups are a very small population. And indeed, those who are coming to the group are coming to the group because they are more isolated. And now when we're talking about those who are aging survivors, of course those who have been lonely, haven't married, don't have a family, are going to be more drawn to be in a group than those who are very busy with their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And so we are now talking about a large, believe it or not, a very large fourth population that is already here. When it comes to suicide, again, from my experience, not only with the people that I have worked with, but with, you know, the larger, greater second generation population, we are talking about, I don't know, in the United, maybe it's different in England, but certainly in the United States, those who have committed suicide is a, you know, I can count them on 2 people that I knew who had, you know, committed suicide. Obviously, there's a few I didn't know. So maybe we're talking about a handful of people who have indeed committed suicide. So again, let's not generalize that more children of survivors are committing suicide than others. The same holds true for the survivor population, just because we have the, you know, the Primo Levis and the Paul Salons and Bartoszewski, the famous ones, and I'm walking on his name. What?
Bruno Bettelheim.
And Bruno Bettelheim, because you know, the famous ones have committed suicide. It means that more Holocaust survivors are committing suicide than the other population.
Ich möchte auf eine besondere Situation bei uns aufmerksam machen, und zwar hier in Deutschland. 1933 angefangen haben sehr viele Psychotherapeuten, Psychoanalytiker, Psychologen, Psychiater Deutschland verlassen. Im Laufe der Zeit immer mehr. Wer hier geblieben ist, war involviert in den meisten Fällen. Das heißt, nach dem Krieg, diejenigen, die dann in der Psychoabteilung gearbeitet haben, Psychiater, Psychologen, alle möglichen, kamen sehr oft aus Arztfamilien, die aber irgendwie im System involviert waren. Und ich möchte in diesem Zusammenhang sagen, dass es deutlich weniger Hilfe gab für Überlebende, und zweite Generation war überhaupt kein Thema. Aber eine Ressource, die die Überlebenden, aber auch die der zweiten Generation haben, sehr viele von denen haben soziale Berufe erlernt, haben familientherapeutische Ausbildungen, psychologische Ausbildungen, und es war eine sehr konstruktive Form der Selbsthilfe in vielen Fällen, weil die Hilfe bei anderen Therapeuten gar nicht möglich war. Man stieß auf Unverständnis und wurde auch in vielen Fällen als leidenssehnsüchtig zurückgewiesen. Und ich denke, dass diese Kraft, soziale Zusammenhänge, emotionale Zusammenhänge, systemische Zusammenhänge in den Familien, in den Gruppen zu erlernen, zu verstehen, zu begleiten, zu unterstützen, eine der wesentlichen Ressourcen ist, die auch den Angehörigen der zweiten und dritten Generation geholfen hat. Danke.
Dankeschön. Die letzte.
Mein Name ist Bruno Neurath, ich wohne hier in Köln, der Stadt, in der auch meine Eltern gelebt haben. Mein Vater war 7,5 Jahre im Zuchthaus und im KZ, in mehreren KZs, und ich glaube zu wissen, was die Erfahrungen meines Vaters mit mir persönlich gemacht haben, aber ich muss sagen, ich habe das nie so wichtig genommen. Ich habe meine Leiden auch nicht kultiviert und gepflegt, sondern Stichwort Strategie. Die Strategie, die ich von meinen Eltern, glaube ich, gelernt habe, die kannten das Wort Strategie dabei nicht. Es war, dass sie gesagt haben, mein Vater hat sich 2 Tage vor seinem Tod von uns verabschiedet und hat gesagt, setzt euch in eurer Zukunft für unsere sozialistischen Ideale ein. So, und das ist meine Strategie gewesen, die Dankbarkeit meinen Eltern gegenüber, zu wissen, dass sie gelitten haben, was sie erlitten haben, und die Erinnerung wachzuhalten an diejenigen, die im Widerstand waren. Das ist meine persönliche Strategie und das, was mich gestärkt hat, mit den Erfahrungen meiner Eltern umzugehen.
Die Leute, die in der Sowjetunion waren, und ich glaube, es geht jetzt um unser Thema hier, wir müssen Räume schaffen. Es ist super, dass in Amerika so viele Leute, die zweite Generation sind, Familie bekommen haben und glücklich und zufrieden sind und ihre Eltern unterstützen können. Es gab in größten Teilen der ehemaligen Sowjetunion überhaupt wurde das Thema Holocaust verschwiegen. Es wurde seit vor kurzem in Baby-Jahr ein Monument erstellt, der überhaupt darüber spricht, dass es nicht sowjetische Menschen waren, sondern Juden waren. Kurzum, ich glaube, das ist ganz wichtig, dass wir hier uns gesammelt haben, um die Räume zu schaffen für die, die nicht darüber sprechen gelernt haben. Und es gibt Haufen Menschen, die sich umgebracht haben, die keine Familie bekommen haben und keine Kinder bekommen haben. Und dafür muss man quasi um die 4. Generation, damit sie das nicht so macht, damit sie sich in Deutschland identifizieren können, dass sie Juden sind, dass sie darüber sprechen können und dass sie ihre Familie gründen können. Dafür sind wir hier.